You got fixed the last time? Didn't work.
Somebody clicked the button. So I just turned it back. I just noticed it was turned on. I don't know, somebody clicked the button up here, so that's why. I don't know. It's fixed now.
Good.
Hey, I heard a thumbs up.
Seriously? Could be any of the kids up there messing with her.
Yeah, I just give it to
Did you bring your feelings down? It's your fault.
13 will be the hymn of invitation.
13.
Okay, we're studying the book of Judges. How many judges were there? Wrong. 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 No. Quit guessing. How many judges entirely were there? Who was the last judge?
Samson,
Who?
the strong guy.
No. No. He'll be the last judge. You got that one right. Yeah, he'll be the last judge. No. You know, just think a minute. Who was the very last judge? Quit guessing.
How else are we gonna guess?
Think. There is reason and rationality. And I don't want this to be played on the radio station Sunday because people think I'm harsh and cruel.
You're talking about the period between the last judge and the coming of Christ.
Wrong. Wrong. Who was the last judge? What were judges? Elders. These were not they who we have in the New Testament, but they were a pattern of that which was to come. So, who was the last judge? No, in the Old Testament. Well, there weren't judges in the New Testament as such. Ma'am? Male. Huh?
I don't think that's true, what you just said.
Well, good. Tell me what I didn't say. What I said was false.
You said in the last judge.
In the Old Testament.
Oh, you're speaking specifically about the Old Testament.
Well, yes, we're in the book of Judges. Judges is in the Old Testament.
I was going to say
Is
the
that
New
the word
Testament.
now,
Christ
judges
told
in the new?
the apostles that they would sit on thrones and they would judge the children of Israel.
Okay, but they weren't the last judges in the New Testament, if you want to be explicit. Who are the last judges in the New Testament? No. Right. Members of the church. 1 John 4:1. So that is the truth. What was the purpose of the judges? Where did they fit in? You're right, between Joshua and the kings. Now you can tell me who the last judge was. Who? Samuel. Who was the last guy before the kings? Samuel. Well, take your Bibles and flip over to 1 Samuel. And let's see, it should be around the 7th chapter. Yes. And let's start with verse 18. And Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life.
Okay, 7 doesn't have 18 verses.
I beg your pardon.
1 Samuel,
15 through 17.
you said 18.
Well, it doesn't have 18 verses. I just want to see if he's watching. 1 Samuel 15. No. 1 Samuel 7. 15 and 17. But we'll read verse 16 too. You there? I'll wait on you. First.
All right.
Chapter 15.
No, 7.
Chapter 7.
Verse 15.
All right.
He said verse 18.
Man, should I write it on the board?
Yep.
Well, you're dealing with old people now. Get it.
And Samuel,
No, I don't want you to read it. Because I don't like the way you read.
because what?
I just don't like it.
Well, I read from the King James Version.
Go ahead.
Just the one that sounds right.
Go ahead.
And Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. And he went from year to year in circuit to Bethel and Gilgal and Mizpah, and judged Israel in all those places. And his return was to Ramah. Ramah? Something like that.
Rama.
Ramah. For there was his house, and there he judged Israel, and there he built an altar unto the Lord.
All right. So the last judge of Israel was, who was the first judge? Well, let's go to the book of Judges and we'll turn and see. Othniel. In the Judges 1 and verse 13.
And Othniel the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, took it and gave him
Achish. Aksha.
his daughter to wife. And it came to pass, when she came to him, that she moved him to ask of her father a bill. She lighted from off her ass, and Caleb said unto her, What wilt thou? She said unto him, Give me a blessing, for thou hast given me a southland. Give me also springs of water. And Caleb gave her the upper springs and the nether springs. Children of the Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, went up out of the city of palm trees with the children of Judah into the wilderness of Judah, which lieth in the south of Arad, and they went and dwelt among the people. Judah went with Simeon his brother, and they slew the Canaanites that inhabited Zebulun, and utterly destroyed it. And the name of the city was called Hormah. And Judah took Gaza with the coast thereof, and Askelon with the coast thereof, and Ekron with the coast thereof. And the Lord was with Judah, and he drove out the inhabitants of the mountain, but could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley, because they had chariots of iron. Keep going.
Mm-hmm.
And they gave Hebron unto Caleb, as Moses said, and he expelled thence the three sons of Anak. The children of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites that inhabited Jerusalem, but the Jebusites dwelled with the children of Benjamin in Jerusalem unto this day. In the house of Joseph they also went up against Bethel, and the Lord was with them. The house of Joseph sent to
Describe.
It broke up on them. Bethel. Now the name of the city before was Luz. The spies saw a man come forth out of the city, and they said unto him, Show us, we pray thee, the entrance into the city, and we will show thee mercy. When he showed them the entrance into the city, they smote the city with the edge of the sword, but they let go of the man and all his family. The man went into the land of the Hittites and built a city and called the name thereof Luz, which is the name thereof unto this day. Neither did Manasseh drive out the inhabitants of Bethshean and her towns, nor Cana and her towns, nor the inhabitants of Dor and her towns, nor the inhabitants of Ibleam and her towns, nor the inhabitants of Megiddo and her towns, but the Canaanites would dwell in that land. It came to pass when Israel was strong that they put the Canaanites to tribute and did not utterly drive them out. Neither did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites that dwell in Gezer, but the Canaanites dwell in Gezer among them. Neither did Zebulun drive out the inhabitants of Kidron, nor the inhabitants of Nahalal, but the Canaanites dwell among them and became tributaries. Neither did Asher drive out the inhabitants of Akko, nor the inhabitants of Zidon, nor of Alad, nor of Akzib, nor of Helbah, nor of Aphik, nor of Rehah, but the not drive them out. Neither did Naphtali drive out the inhabitants of Beth-shean, Shemesh, nor the inhabitants of Beth-anath, but he dwelled among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land. Nevertheless, the inhabitants of Beth-shemesh and Beth-anath became tributaries unto them. And the Amorites forced the children of Dan into the mountain, for they would not suffer them to come down to the valley. But the Amorites would dwell in the mountain. There's Ajalon and Shalabim, yet the hand of the house of Joseph rebelled, so that they became tributaries. And the coast of the Amorites was from the going of Arkrabim, from the rock and upward.
Very good.
Hey, you did it better than me.
I think you enjoyed that.
Yeah.
You look like you enjoyed you being
Oh,
tortured.
he does. He does. Watching the squirm.
What are you reading about here? The children of Israel were told to take the promised land. But what did they do?
They
They mingled with the people instead of taking over.
Exactly. Turn to Numbers 13:55.
Your question was, who was the first judge?
That's what we're going for. I had to get us in there first.
Is it Moses?
There isn't any numbers.
The one that's mentioned in the book of Judges.
There's no 1355.
Yeah.
Numbers
Numbers 13.
33.
Yeah.
You said 15, 55. It only goes up to 33.
They're taking out again.
Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Numbers 33.
You never asked for Numbers 33.
So Numbers 13:33 or Numbers 33:13?
33, I think it's verse 55.
Okay, well, Numbers 33:55 says, "But if ye will not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then it shall come to pass that those which ye let remain of them shall be pricks in your eyes, and thorns in your sides, and shall vex you in the land wherever ye dwell. Moreover, it shall come to pass that I shall do unto you as I thought to do unto them."
What was the problem that caused the judges to be written? You've already stated it. They didn't drive these people out. They allowed them to become tributaries. They allowed them to live amongst them. They allowed them to be in the land. When they allowed them to be in the land, you're going to find out that all of these people had a problem. The problem was these people would rise up and form coalitions, and they would take Israel in certain places of its land. Had they done what God said, we wouldn't be discussing this. Now, so the first one that actually is a legitimate judge, we'll start with chapter 2. Now, it's a pretty interesting thing.
Judges.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, verse
1.
And an angel of the Lord came on from Gilgal to Bochim.
It's Gilgal.
Gilgal to Bochim, and said, I made you to go up out of Egypt and have brought you unto the land. And said, I made you to go up out of Egypt and brought you into the land which I swear unto your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you. And ye shall make no league with all the inhabitants of this land. You shall throw them down their altars, but ye have not obeyed my voice. Why have ye done this?
Now, what was he asking?
Why didn't you do what I told you?
Yeah. And what had they done? They left those people in amongst them. By leaving the people in amongst them, what did they do to themselves? Keep reading.
Wherefore I also said, I will not drive them out from before you, but they shall be as thorns in your sides, and their gods shall be a snare unto you.
What were we just reading in Numbers?
Same thing.
Exactly. So what is he doing? Reiterating. Keep going.
And it came to pass when the angel of the Lord spake these words unto all the children of Israel, and the people lifted up their voice and wept. And they called the name of that place Bochim, and they sacrificed there unto the Lord. And when Joshua had let the people go, the children of Israel went every man unto his inheritance to possess the land. And the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders that outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great works of the Lord that he did for Israel.
Interesting. How long were the people faithful to God? As long as the elders who served with the minister of God lived. And until they died, they were faithful. When they died, what did the Jews do? They went right back to the cesspool. Keep going.
Joshua, I did that one. And Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old. And they buried him in the border of his inheritance in Timnath-Heres, and the mount of
It's Heres, Timnath-Heres.
Timnath-Heres, and the mount of
Ephraim. Mm-hmm.
On the north side of the hill of
Gaash.
Gaash.
Y'all don't sound to me like you've studied too much in the Hebrew language. Don't feel like the Lone Ranger.
I'm looking at the pronunciation part of it. I don't see any Y's.
It's you.
You gotta pause after that.
It's the way the word is broken up.
That means you can do a class. Michelle did an excellent job.
Keep going.
And also all that generation were gathered unto their fathers, and there arose another generation after them.
Now watch this. Which what?
They knew not the Lord,
Why?
because they weren't raised right.
Exactly. Well, that's the truth.
It wasn't that they weren't raised right, it was that they didn't continue.
Well, they weren't raised right also. What was?
Joshua was alive, they did well.
That's correct. Why?
He died, they stopped.
Why?
Because there was no one to lead them.
There's nobody to teach them about the Lord.
Right, but that's their own fault, they didn't continue that.
Yeah, but that's what the parents did. They thought they had won the day. And so they didn't continue to indoctrinate the children when they came along.
Mom and Dad didn't have to do what God said. Why do I?
Right. All right, keep going.
Which knew not the Lord, nor yet the works which he had done for Israel.
So they didn't even know the way the Lord had brought Israel out of bondage. They didn't know how the Lord had used Joshua. Huh?
No, Sandy said that.
It's like the saying today where everybody relies on the preacher to do the study for them instead of studying on their own.
And they didn't teach their children. And when the children raised up, they didn't know anything about it. So what were they open and suspect to? They sent them to the public school system, and they taught them there was no God, and they taught them that there was no morality, and they taught them there was no decency, and nobody had taught them any differently. Yeah. Keep going.
The children of Israel did evil
Why?
before the Lord, because they didn't know.
Why?
Because they weren't raised right.
Why?
Because their parents didn't whip them.
And what else?
They weren't taught. Because they
And what else?
They didn't follow what the elders had told them
No
to do.
preachers in Christ.
And what else? They had all of these people around them. These people who had no experience or no understanding of God, they brought them in as friends and neighbors, and the children began to listen to them because, unbelievably, they taught them by example. All right, keep reading.
And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and served under Balaam.
Balaam. Balaam is just a Hebrew word which means God.
So the double A is a what?
Balaam.
Okay. See?
The second A makes the first A long. Balaam.
So what about that one? The one that sounded gay? Gayash.
Gaash.
There you go.
A is sounded long.
And they forsook the Lord God of their fathers, which brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other gods, of the gods of the people that were round about them, and bowed themselves unto them, and provoked the Lord to anger. And they forsook the Lord, and served Baal, and Ashtaroth, and the anger of the Lord.
Do you know who Baal and Ashtaroth were?
Well, I know who Baal is. And
They're the ones for Easter, right? Easter.
She's the one that brought in Easter, but what were they more famous for than Easter? The Tower of Babel. Keep going.
and the anger of the Lord
You know what the Tower of Babel was?
in Babylon.
No.
They were trying to get to heaven.
Yeah. What were they trying to do? How? How?
Go over there and
Shoot
ransack
the arrow.
the place.
Shoot the arrow up into the sky. Shoot the arrow up into the sky.
No, ma'am.
So they were actually built.
What was the purpose of the Tower of Babel?
Because they were going to go up to heaven, and that was going to.
And what was the means they were going to go to heaven? By the tower. So they kept building it higher and higher and higher.
Somebody came in for it.
Well, no, I don't. They've still probably have got the remnants of it, but no, they didn't tear it down. But what did God do?
Mixed up their language.
That's right. He said, we will have this one in Spanish. We'll have this one in French. We'll have this one in German. We'll have this one in Italian. And so when they went to say, pass the brick, somebody said, what? And they didn't understand each other. Therefore, production stopped.
Just another way of damning them.
All right, keep going. And the anger,
The anger of the Lord was high against Israel. And he delivered them into the hands of spoilers that spoiled them. And he sold them into the hands of their enemies round about, so that they could not any longer stand before their enemies. Whatsoever they went out, the hand of the Lord was against them for evil, as the Lord had said, and as the Lord had sworn unto them, and they were greatly distressed. Nevertheless, the Lord raised up judges, which delivered them out of the hand of those that spoiled them.
now what was the purpose of the judges?
To get them out of the situation that they were in.
That's correct. Are to show them the way home. Are to lead them back to God. All right, keep going.
And yet they would not hearken unto their judges, but they went a whoring after other gods, and bowed themselves unto them. They turned quickly out of the way which their fathers walked in, obeying the commandments of the Lord, but they did not so. And when the Lord raised them up judges, then the Lord was with the judge, and delivered them out of the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For it repented the Lord because of their groanings by reason of them that oppressed them and vexed them. It came to pass, when the judge was dead, that they returned and corrupted themselves more than their fathers in following other gods to serve them, and to bow down unto them. They ceased not from their own doings, nor from their stubborn way.
Now, there's going to be some people ask you, why was Samson a judge?
That's a good question.
But there's an answer.
Because he
We've already answered it.
How he stirred the people. How he stirred the people.
Well, of course, he led them out of the hands of the Philistines. But what was wrong with Samson, I mean.
His wife.
How many?
He had a weakness. His wife.
He had two. Well, he had one and a spare. And why is it that he thought that it was okay to do such chicanery?
Because he had a weakness.
Because he was Samson.
No, he wasn't punished.
He wasn't taught.
Oh, well.
And why wasn't he taught? I don't know the answer to that.
That was the plan of God, though.
I agreed.
No, but it was the plan of God that he be born of a woman.
Sure. Understand. But why didn't his mother and his father teach him morality and that he was to only have one wife?
Because they were taught the same, that there wasn't a rule.
Okay, your answer should have been they did.
Well, that's what I was It's not their fault that he went.
No. They did, but it was too late. Why was it too late? He was past the 7th or 8th grade by then. He had lived amongst these people all this time, and they began to teach him too late. When he went to the Philistines to get a wife, who tried to stop him? Daddy Bear. What did he say to his father? You're not my boss. And he went and found this Philistine woman. Now, and it is true. It's God's plan.
Tried to find him a wife among the Israelites.
Well, he looked. He kept looking and he kept looking, and his lip drug the ground, and he felt sorry for himself and all that. And so he got to where he just had to go find him one that was something to fill his passion. And I guess the Israelite women were just not wild enough for him. So he went and found him one that was.
Well, but they would have told him who he was going to marry, and he wasn't going to have that.
Sir?
They would have told him, pick the Israelite girl, and he wasn't going to have that.
There's something else wrong with this story. How did the Jewish male get his wife?
Well, they already, prearranged, marriage.
So what had Samson's father and mother not done?
They did not do a prearranged.
That's correct. They not only didn't teach him, they didn't prearrange the marriage. Since they did neither, Samson was out to choose his own.
So the marriage was prearranged before birth.
Now, here's a verse of scripture you need to write down. It's the book Judges 2.
Chapter 14 and verse 4 says,
Sir?
chapter 14 and verse 4. It starts with verse 1. And Samson went down to Timnath and saw a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. He came up and told his father and his mother and said, I have seen a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me to wife. Then his father and his mother said unto him, Is there never a woman among the daughters of thy brethren, or among all my people, that thou goest to take a wife of the uncircumcised Philistines? And Samson said unto his father, Get her for me, for she pleases me well. His father and mother knew not that it was of the Lord. That's why I was saying that he had made the arrangement prior that Samson would fall for this woman. It was from the Lord. That wasn't.
I think that's true. Yeah.
It was providentially prepared with the Lord for what reason? Samuel was going to be a judge. Why was Samuel a judge? Because he would lead the children of Israel out of bondage.
Samson.
Yeah, and he did. He finally got the Philistines. Keep going.
Let me keep reading from where I was.
Yeah. So Samson went down to this gal's house, and so he proposed. And when he was proposed, the people there weren't of his kin. They didn't speak his language. They probably weren't exactly the same color. And they called him a dog. They called him a reprobate. They made fun of him. They mocked him. They treated him and told him they did not want him a part of their family. He was garbage. And what'd Samuel do? He said, I'm big, bad, and tough. That's my woman over there. And I'm going to have her. It doesn't matter what it costs me. And they said, you want to bet? He said, yeah, I'll give you a riddle. Now, it was common in those days. Go ahead, continue reading. We skipped to Samuel, but we've skipped Othniel. He was the first one. And we'll go back to that in the 3rd chapter and the 7th verse, if we have enough time.
Out of the eater cameth forth meat, and out of the strong cameth forth sweetness.
What had happened when Samuel was going courting?
He saw a lion who attacked these men. The lion came after him, and he killed the lion, and there was a honeycomb within his mouth or something.
It's close, but no cigar.
Something about a honeycomb being.
Yeah, he saw this lion. The lion attacked him. What did Samson do? He broke his jaw. Yeah.
He turned aside to see a carcass of a lion, and behold, there was a swarm of
Honeybees.
honey in the carcass of the lion.
Yeah. And so Samson made up this riddle. The deal was that if they guessed the answer to the riddle, he would give them how many changes of clothes?
30? Yeah.
And, huh? A lot. They didn't have but one.
Yeah, if you had 2, you were tricked.
So Samson then had to go shopping. Where did he go shopping? To the nearest Philistine town. And what did he find when he got at the nearest Philistine town? And how many times 30 did he get? We don't know. But he brought them in. And he said, you plowed my heifer. But the point was, the in-laws didn't want him. The people, her cousins, her nephews, her friends, and all that, they said, you ain't one of us. We don't want you. You're a dog. You're a creep. You're not even worthy to be here. You're not one of us. And therefore, we'll make sure you aren't happy. But Samson was bad, and he was stubborn, and he said, but she's my woman. And he was going to have her anyway. And so that's why Samson killed the lion. Was it this lion's fault that Samson was making a mistake? No, he was just a means to an end. So we'll go back to that story when we get to it. Now let's go back. We've got to get Othniel and Ehud at least. Let's start with the 3rd chapter and the 7th verse. Yeah. Well, let's go to the 5th verse so you'll know.
And the children of Israel dwelt amongst
Now there's your problem. Where did they dwell? But it was their land. These were immigrants. The children of Israel came in. God had given them the land, but they allowed these people to live amongst them. They spoke really a different language. They had different customs. They had different gods. They were different people. And when the Israelites came in, they said, you don't belong here. Well, wait a minute. Well, God gave us this land. Well, they said, look around you. We're here. And they said, okay, if you're here, you can stay. And we'll raise our kids amongst you. Now, this hard-headed Samson was willing to raise his daughters or his sons or whatever he was going to progenerate amongst the people that didn't believe in God because he had to have that woman. He didn't listen. Keep going.
the children of Israel dwelt amongst the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites.
Hivites.
Huh?
Hivites.
Hivites.
Now, see the 2 I's? H-I-V-I. The second I makes the first I long. Hivites.
And the Jebusites. Right?
Jebusites.
The Jebusites.
See the U?
I see it.
See the I after it?
There's an S after it.
No. The vowels. The vowels was what determines the pronunciation.
Jebusites. And they took their daughters to be their wives.
Ah. And when they took their daughters to be their wives, they did what? They messed up the purity of the lineage and the teaching of God. All right, keep going.
Gave their daughters to their sons and served their gods. And the children of Israel did.
Why couldn't it have been the other way? Because the Baptists will teach their doctrine in spite of Texas. But you put somebody in the Church of Christ in there, and they ain't got enough guts to do that. And then they wonder, well, why did my son go off to the Baptist church? And the answer is real simple. If you'd have taught him from the time he was little about the Bible and the Lord's church and the plan of salvation and the Lord's Supper and the gospel of Christ, when he ran into this thing, sweetheart would have caused him some trouble. a little personal story. I was engaged to be married to this young lady. And I was preaching in a congregation, had a lot of trouble because it was an interdenominational church. How I got in that was a long story. So I would sometimes come back to see her after I preached on Sunday morning, and I had gone to her house this day. And so as I was telling them about my preaching the gospel and how the Baptists didn't like it and the Methodists didn't appreciate it and all that other stuff, she pops up and she says, well, I don't believe in this one church and but one. I don't believe you got to be baptized to be saved.
Good.
I don't, yeah, it was. Because, son, I turned about as red as these seats. I stood up. Her dad said, where are you going? I said, I'm leaving. Well, where are you going? I said, I'm going home. Well, aren't you going to take her with you? I said, no, I'll never be back. It was just that I don't know what came over me, but I never got over it. These people say, oh, it don't matter. One church is good as another. It don't matter as long as you believe, because we give you the last word here. Well, that's what they say. And so what happened was these kids grew up thinking that. But what was happening then is that the devil would cause his people to indoctrinate God's children. And the parents stood around with snow in their mouth and wouldn't do anything about it. Well, I think it's too much to ask that we have somebody that's going to say, there's just one church and but one. Who's that crazy anyway? Well, now you see what happened. The sons of the Philistines, the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, and the Amorites, along with the Jebusites, all taught Baalism. What did the children of God teach? We'll give you the last word. That's exactly what happened. All right, keep going. I'll preach this sermon on the radio one day. I'll have some fun out of it. All right, so here we go. 9, verse 9.
And when the children of Israel cried unto the Lord raised up a deliverer to the children of Israel.
Now, wait a minute. Here they'd done all this dirt and all this damage, and now they copped out and cried to God. Why didn't they take care of the situation before and they wouldn't have that problem? Because they just had to have that woman. You wouldn't believe what people will do for what they call love. Keep going.
He delivered them, even Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother.
How did you pronounce his word?
Kenaz.
It's Othniel.
I said Othniel.
No, he already said that.
I said Othniel.
Oh, okay.
I got that one right.
Yeah.
Pretty good. I'll buy it.
So what was the son of Kenaz? He was a Canaanite. Who was a Canaanite? He was of the ancestry of Jethro. That traced his ancestry all the way back to Cain. Keep going. He's Caleb's younger brother. Who was Caleb? Was Caleb a Canaanite? No, he was a Jew. How was he his younger brother then? He was his brother-in-law.
Intermarriage.
No, he's his brother-in-law. They had married sisters. All right.
And the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he judged Israel and went out to war. And the Lord delivered Chushan-Rishathaim,
Not bad.
One more time, son?
Just run.
Chushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia.
Yeah, that's close enough. It's Cushan Rishathaim. And the boy he graduated from high school before he could spell his name.
Honestly, they got some weird.
Yeah.
And his hand prevailed against Chushan-Rishathaim. son of Kenaz, died.
All right. That was the first one, Othniel. He judged Israel. What did he do in judging Israel? He brought them back to the Lord. You get that? Brought them back to the Lord. Did you get that? You brought them back to the Lord. Have you got it? Now turn to James 5:16. Yeah. I believe so. All these people talk about all these things, but they never apply. 5:16, I believe it is.
Confess your faults.
No, verse 14, we'll start there, yeah.
James chapter what?
5,
Chapter 5.
start with verse 14,
Okay.
and we'll go through verse 16.
And that says, is any sick among you?
What does he mean sick?
He means
We're going to find out. Does he mean he have a cold? Does he have the flu? Or what's he sick about?
he's talking about the whole, he's talking about your spirit.
All right. This is a spiritual thing. Keep going. See, over in the Old Testament was physical. In the New Testament it's spiritual. All right. Is any sick among you?
Let him call for the judges.
That's correct. Let him call for the judges. Why?
And
Because they'll
let
bring you
them,
back to the Lord.
Huh?
Because they'll bring you back to the Lord.
That's correct. They won't let the devil have the last word. Keep going.
let them pray over him, anointing him with the oil in the name of the Lord.
Now keep going.
And the prayer of faith shall save the sick. And the Lord shall raise him up, and if he have committed sins, they shall be forgiven him.
Ah, keep going.
Confess your faults one to another, and pray for one another, that ye may be healed. The effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth
Availeth much. What would the elders do? Bring them back to the Lord. Why was this guy sick? He had quit worshiping with the church. They had somebody giving the devil the last word. So the function that is seen in Othniel. Now let's go right quick to Ehud. 3rd chapter and 12th verse.
James?
Judges. We're going from Old Testament to New Testament. Type and antitype.
Tell me that. Judges chapter 3 and verse what?
12.
12. Okay. And the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord.
Why?
Because they did.
No, because that's correct. The eldership died off. And the ones that were bringing them back to the Lord no longer was there. What happened to the others? They didn't do the job. Yes, sir.
And the Lord strengthened Eglon, the king of Moab, against Israel, because they had done evil in the sight of the Lord.
Now, why did the Lord strengthen Eglon? He going to put a whooping on the Jews. Why?
He said he would. He said he would.
That's correct. He told them, you bring them boys in, and I'll cause you to serve them. And then when you repent, I'll send you a judge. Keep going.
And gathered unto him the children of Ammon and Amalek, and went to smote Israel, and possessed the city of palm trees. So
Does that mean that was West Palm Beach?
So the children of Israel served Eglon, the king of Moab, 18 years. When the children of Israel cried unto the Lord raised them up a deliverer. Ehud.
And what was Ehud? An elder, a judge. And what was his job going to be? Get in there for fisticuffs, swords and staves, and kill them all. Kill the work of the devil. That's the function of an elder. And of course, keep going.
The son of Gera, a Benjamite, a man left-handed, and by him the children of Israel sent a present unto Eglon, king of Moab.
He was left-handed. What's the problem with being left-handed?
Nothing.
Inferior.
Nothing.
Nothing inferior. It just means you're good at something.
It means he was inferior.
Katie's left-handed, I didn't know
So
that.
is Austin.
Keep going.
They were surprised he could
You know, you'd be surprised at the people that used to say that if you were left-handed, you were inferior. There is nothing to that, but that's what they said. Keep going. No, sure, you're right.
Ehud made him a dagger with 2 edges of a cubit length, and he did gird it under his raiment upon his right thigh, because that way he could reach across like that.
Left-handed had its advantages, didn't it?
And he brought the present to Eglon, king of Moab,
And
and Eglon was a very
what was the avoirdupois of Eglon?
the what now?
Avoirdupois.
Average boys.
The profile of his size.
He's a big dude.
He's a big fat cat. All right, keep going.
And when he had made an end to offer the present, he sent away the people that bare the present. But he himself turned again from the quarries that were by Gilgal, and said, I have a secret errand unto thee, O king, who said, Keep silence. And all that stood by him went out from him. And Ehud came unto him, and he was sitting in the summer parlor, which he had for himself alone. And Ehud said, I have a message from God unto thee. And he rose out of the sea. And Ehud put forth his left hand and took the dagger from his right thigh and thrust it into the belly. The haft also went in after the blade, and the fat closed upon the blade so that he could not draw the dagger out of his belly, and the dirt came out, the dirt being his guts.
Okay, so how and what was the message? Sin's going to die. Who brought the message? Ehud. What was his function? A judge. He was going to bring the people back to God. Listen, if you don't understand the purpose of these things, these are just tales and stories. This is as far as we'll go tonight. And if you don't know it, are we still having cupcakes after the service? All right. We've started sinning. We're eating in the church building.
Send a judge.
Okay, where is he?
He's somewhere, he'll be here.
No. Why will he not send a judge to stop that? You just want to run your mouth. Okay. And if you'd stop and listen, he'd sound a lot smarter. Why would it that the Lord wouldn't send somebody to judge us for eating in a church building? That's correct. The law of God, in fact, demanded that you fellowship. Yeah. And so every congregation that you see in the New Testament had a fellowship meal. Problem is they kind of got confused and they thought that was the Lord's Supper sometimes.